Hi, this is Catherine, and this is Taking Tea with Catherine. Today I'm drinking a Moroccan mint green tea from Upton, which is a recent purchase, and I just wanted to get right into it. Oh my goodness, yes. Um, I'm going to do a kind of a tea in history today. It's loosely tea in history because I'm going to show you some of my new teas again. I got the rest of my haul in, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about history and tea, very little, maybe a little more, who knows, because I kind of plan this to be a slightly rambly discussion, and a little talk about the book that I finished at last. The Mirror and the Light. Oh yay. I'm happy to have finished it because I haven't completed as many books this month as I had hoped to. I'm in the middle of a billion books right now, but finishing them is another story. But this one I had started in March, early-ish, middle-ish March, and it is a long book, but still, I kind of thought that I would be so absorbed in it that I would finish it right away. But there's no fault to the actual book. But let me start with the teas. So, the teas I ordered from Hardy & Sons are both, I believe, good teas. One of them I haven't actually tried yet, so I'm only speaking out of good reviews and just what it sounds like. The first one I got was Queen Catherine, and a little disappointed actually about both of these tins. And look, I'm understanding that right now, the fact that I can even get teas delivered to me is a good thing. I don't know what's going on at the point of distribution. Maybe they normally use their other labels and tins that I had expected as I saw in the pictures online. And maybe it's just right now they can't do it for reasons, and so I get that. But, I'm allowed to feel disappointed without being cranky about it, and I'm not cranky. This one, I'm a hoarder as well, so I actually held on to an old tin, and so in a way it's good because I could show it to you if you could barely see it, though. This is what it used to look like, Queen Catherine. And that's Queen Catherine of Braganza. It's not me, despite what anybody else might say. I got that mainly because I like the taste of it. I like the Queen Catherine blend tea. It's a black tea blend. Let me see if it's actually described here. They don't talk too many. It just says blended black tea. Usually they're a little more... well, this says, as might be expected of a good Chinese tea blend, the flavors are round and relaxed. Round. The flavors are a blend of dark honey, unsweetened cocoa, and hints of spice. That's kind of nice. That's a pretty nice description. This doesn't sound like the top favorite kind of description that I go for, but it's not a bad one either. And I've had it before, so I know I like it. So, and the other one, the tea is still hot, as you can see. I'm still blowing on it. Is Jane's Garden, which is actually the one I'm a little more disappointed as to the actual tin, because the tin I saw online is kind of a pinkish, really gardeny looking tin. I thought that'd be very cheerful. Again, I'll live. I've wanted to try this for a while. I think I got it for somebody once as a gift, but mainly I got it because of the name, Jane, because, for my cat, Janie. So I thought that would be kind of a... It's always fun to get teas that have similar names to one of your pets. I did look online to see if there were any Zenobia teas, and there are after Queen Zenobia, but I just wasn't in the mood to order more teas because, come on. And I think there's more named after Freddie, because Freddie Mercury. Anyway, that's another ramble, but I'll let you know when I do try this if it's any good. I'm sure it will be. It's a green tea, so yeah. So this has see, this is funny because it doesn't really tell you much about it, and that, again, this is even more disappointing because it doesn't really describe it. I did look it up online, and it's a green tea with different floral additions, like I think rose, something else. I think that's probably my biggest problem, is that they don't get into too much about it, but it is a good cause apparently. The Jane they're speaking of, there's a some sort of charity that gives to, like, I think cancer research or whatever, breast cancer something or other, and never hurts to be giving a charity in one way or another, just by drinking tea, although they do say green and black tea does have certain cancer fighting properties. I don't know how well it works. Anyway, so this is where the history part of me comes in, not so much the Jane's Garden, because really. But, although, technically both of the names on these are names of Tudor queens, multiple in the case of Queen Catherine. There were 3 Queen Catherines. There was Catherine of Aragon, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. All very different people, very different, I don't want to say very different backgrounds, but pretty different backgrounds, and also different ends. Queen Catherine of Aragon died, alone and sad and sick, but she actually, I think, if I'm not wrong, I think she lived, as far as lifespan, longer than the other queens. Because she had been married to Henry and had lived some time before he finally decided he was done with her and came up with reasons to try to end the marriage. Catherine Howard was definitely the shortest lived, and she made a lot of silly mistakes. When I say silly, I've never been one, she's never been my favorite queen, but I also say she did not know what she was in for. She was supposed to be a teenager when she married Henry, and they were only married a couple of years, and then that was it, because she, got into an affair with this man named Culpeper, who was, I think, a relative of hers as well, who was very close to the king. And he's mentioned in The Mirror and the Light, by the way, as well, as is Catherine Howard. And that in itself was the very little discretion there. And then also having, and who knows how it happened, but having had people join her at court who were people from her past, who knew a lot about her past, which also worked against her. This girl, it's like textbook not good if you're going to be part of the Tudor life. And I feel sorry for her only because I feel like the way she was brought up, she kind of didn't know better. You could say, wow, she was really stupid. She was, but I think in more of an ignorant sense that she really didn't know better, but should have. I don't know. Catherine Parr, I think, even though she did still die young, because she died in childbirth after Henry died and she married Thomas Seymour, I think she is still, I mentioned this before, one of my favorite of the, I think my favorite of the Catherine Queens, because she was just, the way she got herself out of the situation where she almost got arrested while she was being married to Henry and stuff, and how she talked herself out of it is just pretty amazing. I wanted to read a book. I bought a book at Book Off called, I think it's called The Queen's Gambit, and it was supposed to be a historical novel about her. And I can't find it in my apartment. I have a weird feeling because I feel like I saw it in one part of my apartment, so maybe this happened before where I was looking for a book and I couldn't find it, and then I went to the exact same spot like the next day and found it, so who knows. But it's possible that I left it in my office where I work, so I may not be able to get a hold of it to read it, but I have plenty of other books to read, so I'm not, whatever. But she's also in The Mirror and the Light, so the Queen Catherines I just talked about are definitely not this Queen Catherine of this tea. As I mentioned before, it's Catherine of Braganza, who, even though part of it is legendary and part of it is truth, she came from Portugal as a princess from Portugal and married Charles II, who was of the same time period as not Thomas Cromwell, but Oliver Cromwell, which wasn't really a great relationship between the two of those, obviously. But, so they say that she helped bring tea drinking as a practice in England, and no one knows for sure who started. Obviously, if someone is the queen, they do lead some sort of fashion and popularity. They lead in that sort of thing because that's what they do. But I don't know how much. Was it definitely her being the tea drinker that made it popular for other people to start drinking tea? And honestly, the everyday person didn't really drink tea regularly in England for another more decades to come. But that's what I feel like this is the most interesting thing to me about history, because when you think about someone like Thomas Cromwell, who lived in the 16th century, he probably never even heard of tea. Unless there was some weird communication between himself and Asia or whatever, but I doubt it. So when I started getting into reading about tea, because I really was a tea reader, not tea leaf reader, but like reading about tea and its history and about tea itself. I was actually surprised when I realized when tea became a big thing and became part of like the English culture, you know? I was gonna say British culture, but because I'm also referencing Cromwell and stuff, this is before Britain was the thing. But it's weird because when the average person wants to talk about like the stereotypical Englishman, you picture someone with a cup of tea. I mean, and I've been to England a number of times, and not every English person, male or female, is a big tea drinker. But it is it is something you see quite often. But most of English history, tea is not a thing. It affects English history, and it affects a lot of other history, England's relationship with tea, for certain. But previous, to it, I guess the 17th or more like 18th century, tea was just not important whatsoever or even dreamed of in English history. I would say maybe picturing someone at the pub drinking a pint is a little closer, not perfect, but a little closer to a stereotypical Englishman in more ancient history. So whatever. So that was just my little. I want to do a discussion of my tea library that is just about the history of tea, but I just haven't really gotten to it yet. So back to The Mirror and the Light. I really did love this. I would give it a 5-star. There were points, just like with the other Bennett sisters I mentioned last week, there were points where I thought, could we trim this down just a little bit? But at the same time, it was very enjoyable, and it also kind of works. Number one, to me, a successful novelist is someone who, I mean, unless they're just writing about everybody and telling the story, but if they're doing it from the point of view of a person, making that the character that they are focused on, if you can actually feel for them and sympathize with them and take their side, then you are successful to me. Also, I think being as historically accurate as possible is nice too. A lot of historical novelists take liberties and make someone pregnant where they would never have been, or people met that were not known to have met, that kind of thing. And even in The Mirror and the Light, there are characters that are introduced that were not in the historical record. They're just people that could have been around, but just their names weren't, actual real names that existed. So it doesn't really change history too much, and it's and it just helps to move the story along, really. But I don't know. It with Thomas Cromwell, because I had read about him in years past. Whenever I read anything with Tudor history, he would pop up. And especially the Henry VIII time, he was very, very important during that time. So many things happened in the middle to end of Henry's reign that had his influence on it. Not to mention his predecessor, Cardinal Wolsey, who was a big influence on Cromwell and someone he was pretty loyal to. Not religiously, but in a sense of loyalty. But when I've read about Thomas Cromwell in the past or seen him dramatized, there are moments where I felt for him, but he was always portrayed as ruthless. I mean, this is someone who brought down Anne Boleyn so fast. Not that she did some things of her own too that were out of Henry's favor, but I mean, when it was time to just find a way to get Anne out, I mean, he did such good work, I have to say. Whether you like that he did that or not, I mean, you have to admire that, but oh my goodness. When you read that, you do sort of, yes, you think, wow, he was very successful in a lot of ways, but not a warm, fuzzy kind of person. And the Wolf Hall trilogy, which is basically what people are calling it, the Cromwellian trilogy, whatever you want to call it, is sympathetic to him and doesn't make him a teddy bear ever. I mean, they give him they make him human because they focus a little more on his home life, his family. This book, I know they do this in the other books too, but I haven't read them in a while. But this one really does go a lot into his past and how it formed him. And he had a rough past, and some of it may have been filled in that we don't know about, but just even the little bit we know about him, this is not a guy who had a cushy life. So you do feel for him, and you live with him because of it being such a long book and a long trilogy. You live with him. You see his communications. You see how he handles everybody. And even though sometimes you see him taking down somebody with such a, like I said again, ruthlessly, in a way that is just you still feel like he is someone that you're with. And then suddenly, when you get to the end, toward the end of the story, when his downfall comes, it is. Even though I know it's coming, I people say, oh, should you really tell people that that's what happens to him? Isn't that a spoiler? How could it be a spoiler when it's a big part of history? But it is still, when it happens, when he finally goes down, even though I saw certain things that were coming that you could say, okay, this is going to be bad for him. It just does sort of take your breath away, because it's like, oh, wow. Anybody working for Henry VIII, anyone around that court was in constant danger. I would say the one person who was in the least amount of danger, considering, was Charles Brandon, the Duke of Suffolk, who was a close friend of Henry's, but he had gotten himself in hot water with Henry earlier because he married Henry's not wife, sister, his younger sister, without Henry's permission. And so he was in some trouble, but he picked, if you could say picked, he did this at a time when Henry was still somewhat reasonable and somewhat okay, where even if he was angry at you, he wasn't just gonna, condemn you forever. So by the time you hit these events in The Mirror and the Light, this is something of the long past, and Brandon just gets through his life. He doesn't die of execution or anything like that. He lives for a Tudor life, a pretty good lifespan. Not that long, but I think he got sick and died or whatever, but he didn't die out of any disfavor from Henry. And so I would say he was one of the more successful people of that time. His descendants, not so much, if you know about the Greys. Oy. But whatever. And so, since I'm rambling, speaking of time spans and life spans, I thought of something recently. I was watching some documentary, I think, about Henry VIII, and they mentioned something about Henry VIII died on his father's 90th birthday. Now, his father had died some time ago, but the fact is, even though it was extremely rare in Tudor times, and even still rare now, but it's more likely you will see people living until their 90s and to 100 now. It's rare, and obviously now the Queen of England is in her 90s. She's, 94, I think? So nowadays it's easier to see that, but back then, although her father didn't live that long, back then it was very much less likely that someone could live till 90 or 100. However, it was possible, and I thought about it. I was like, Henry VIII, if his father would have lived, he could have never. It was possible that he could never have become king. He could have if his father could have lived till 90. It was a possible thing, weirdly enough. Even Richard III, although he would have been, I think, around 100, close to 100, still could have lived if he hadn't been killed in battle. So I don't know. It's just weird when you think of time, and I'm trying to figure out when to fit that in. I know this doesn't quite fit in. But it does in a sense, because Thomas Cromwell died also, well, not for health reasons, but in his 50s. So considering how most people in those days seem to have only made it into their 50s, he still kind of had a longish life. So I'm going all over the place, because this is not necessarily a review. It's more of a rambling discussion of my feelings after finishing the book. I kind of want to read more about him. There is a biography that I'm trying to get a hold of. It's a little pricey. I mean, not extremely, but because I'm cheap and because I just did another order, oh no, on Book Outlet and other places, that it almost seems ridiculous. And am I really going to go right to it right now and read it? Probably not. So I'm trying to hold off. But I do find Thomas Cromwell to be so fascinating. Not just how he rose and what it took, how many steps in his life it took to rise, but also how he fell and how, he was rising. The last year of his life, he made it to the Earl of Essex. That was a big thing coming from someone who was a blacksmith's son, from South London or whatever. But yeah, and then suddenly his fall. But I have to say, even though you can say things like, didn't he see it coming? Couldn't he? He was such a survivor. How did it happen? They do a good job here of explaining certain things that happened to him the last year or so of his life that could have clouded his judgment a little bit, and certain steps that he took out of rare lapse of reason and more of a feeling of wanting to get even and doing certain things. The Anne of Cleves debacle, the marriage, definitely had part of it. It was partially to blame. Not so much the match itself, because no one could have known how Henry and Anna would have reacted to each other. It wasn't so much that, it was the fact that after Henry realized he did not like this woman, he was still forced to marry her, and then he wasn't able to get a way out of it right away. Someone like Thomas Cromwell, who was like so brilliant in so many other ways of handling things, should have been able to do that. And because he didn't, it wasn't that he was, off of their head because of that, but it was like there's a little chink in the armor, and his enemies, who were already angry at him, already looking for ways, just found that, worked within that, and worked in the political background between kings and people who are having treaties and whatever, and just found a way to turn not just Henry against Thomas Cromwell, but people who were formerly Cromwell supporters, people who worked with him and seemed to look up to him and probably still did. All I know is that he dies. Apparently his execution was a bit botchy, but he dies, and Henry VIII was known to have regretted his death. And not that he would have ever blamed himself for allowing it to happen, but he definitely would have blamed his counselors, because there was no one else like Cromwell who could have handled things in a way that was satisfactory to Henry. But that was Henry's problem now. So, anyway, again, this wasn't so much review. You're going to see plenty of reviews of this book, and I already said I give it 5 stars. Wonderful read. It is a slow read in a lot of ways. It can be emotional in some ways, but not like, although it was just sad to read of his end. It just is. But, oh my goodness, if you like historical novels, if you like the first 2 books, especially Tudor Times, go for it, please do. So this has been a slightly wrong rambling Catherine tea and history and tea. So I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know if you've read the book, if you want to read the book, if you've read that biography. Even though I can't remember the guy's name, it's got something with a D, so that's not helping. If you tried any of these teas, let me know what you think. This is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and history filled day. Bye.